everyone, and welcome to the Wildlife Wednesday Monthly Roundup. I'm Tenley Thompson.
And I'm Tyler Greenlee.
And we have so much amazing wildlife content from Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park to show you this month. Let's get started. First and foremost, everybody's favorite, we've got to do a bear update on the latest and greatest from all of the bears in our local parks.
Hi everyone, this is Tyler coming to you this month with the July Bear Update. This past month was a very exciting and dramatic time for bears here in the Tetons and Yellowstone, and we are excited to update you on some of the bears we see regularly on tour, as well as some bears that surprised us with some exciting encounters. To start, we unfortunately have some sad news. Grizzly 793 lost her 3 cubs. It's uncertain how exactly she lost them, but it was likely a large aggressive male grizzly killed them. Male bears kill a large proportion of cubs born every year. They do this to reduce food competition and to free females up for mating. While grizzly bears 399 and 610 seem to raise cubs very successfully, 793 has struggled to rear offspring. Over the past 5 years or so, she has lost several litters of cubs and currently only has 1 surviving offspring. Even though 793 lost her cubs this year, she will likely produce another litter of cubs in the coming years, and hopefully will be more successful at raising those cubs. Now, even though 793 did lose her cubs, Grizzly Bear 610 has been successful at keeping hers alive. She also has 3 cubs, and they are alive and healthy. Part of her success could be that she moves around quite a bit, making it harder for large males to find and hunt her family down. It also means that she can be one of the more elusive bears to see out on tour here in Grand Teton. And when we see her, she rarely stays in view for more than a couple minutes. So seeing her is very lucky. Her 3 cubs have already grown incredibly fast. They seem to have doubled in size since we first saw them back in late April. And it's no doubt that a diet of elk and fresh spring vegetation has helped them grow so quickly. Now, Grizzly Bear 610 is, of course, the daughter of the famous Grizzly Bear 399. During the month of June, Grizzly 399 has been even more elusive than her daughter 610. We did see her mate with a large male bear, but since then she seems to have disappeared. We did have one other sighting of her. It's likely she's elusive now because she doesn't have any cubs to fend for. And so that allows her to travel further distances and to be in areas where there are large male grizzlies, since she doesn't have to protect those cubs anymore. And that means she's often in areas where there is simply not a place to view her. Now, besides regular seeing the famous female grizzlies of Grand Teton, we also see many other bears on tour. During the past few weeks, a rather large male grizzly has been at large in Grand Teton. Several times he has been seen feeding on kills. Check out this crazy footage of him ripping into an adult elk carcass. Pretty crazy. This large male bear, or male bears in general, are often nomadic, and there's no saying how long he will stay in the park. Because of the high density of grizzly bears in Grand Teton and Yellowstone, we want everyone to practice bear safety when out in these wild areas. Please remember to carry bear spray, make noise, and never ever hike alone in the wild in the parks here, especially in the northern areas of Grand Teton and Yellowstone. Finally, everyone, I want to share this amazing footage of a wolf and grizzly encounter shot on a multi-day tour in Yellowstone. Wolves and bears coexist on this landscape just as they do in many other areas of North America, and interactions with these 2 predators are common. Here in this video, the oldest wolf in Yellowstone, 907F, who is about 11 years old, tests an adult grizzly. In this situation, she moves on quickly after realizing the bear has no food. We often see younger wolves play and even chase bears. But adult wolves lose interest in bears pretty quickly if there's no food or if pups are not threatened. In Yellowstone, these two predators mainly interact around carcasses when bears challenge wolves for their kills. But these are more skirmishes than fights, and neither species regularly harms the other. Well, thanks everyone for joining in on Wildlife Wednesday. I just want to take a quick moment to thank all of our wonderful guides who captured all the images and videos that you saw in this month's bear video. We have some amazing people who are out in the field every single day tracking these animals down. And I just wanted to send them all a big thank you for sending us all of this amazing footage. Keep up the good work, guys.
Thanks everyone for tuning in today. In Grand Teton and Yellowstone, it's not just the big animals we see. We see lots of smaller animals. And Bo is here to talk about pelicans, an animal that we see quite regularly on tour and are actually quite fascinating.
Hey gang, Bo here, Guided Eco-Tour Adventures. We're talking about American white pelicans we have right here behind us. We're currently standing at the Oxbow Bend in Grand Teton National Park. Welcome to summer in the Tetons, a beautiful time of year. These big birds behind us are kind of a treat for us here. Not a lot of folks come to Wyoming and expect to see pelicans, but it's true, they are here. So we're gonna jump in, learn a little bit more about these birds and why we love seeing them while we're on tour here in the Tetons. American white pelicans are a super fun part of being on tour in the summertime in Jackson Hole and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. They are a seasonal species for us, only showing up in the summer months, and often are taken as a sign of spring when we see their large wingspans flying over the Tetons, over the valleys, showing us their little black-tipped wings that are quite unique to this bird. These birds have an enormous wingspan, actually the second average largest wingspan after the California condor, coming in at usually around 9 feet. These birds live somewhere between 15 to 20 years, and the reason they're coming to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is because this is where they breed. So on tour, oftentimes we see these birds in places like the Oxbow Bend or other river environments because they are fish eaters. They actually work together and will drive fish into shallower areas of water. And then using those large bills, they will scoop through the water to grab those fish. These pelicans don't dive like brown pelicans that some of you watching might be familiar with in your home areas, but instead bob their heads under the water to get those fish. Occasionally, these American pelicans will also eat crayfish or salamanders as well. Now, as they're coming up here, again for that breeding season, you might notice when you see American white pelicans that they have what's called a bill horn on top of their bill, kind of running parallel with the length of the bill. Looks like a small crescent shape. Both males and females carry this bill, and it's actually a growth that appears on the bill only during the breeding season. Both males and females will grow these little horns, as they are called, but the males are quite a bit larger than the females. These horns are then shed after the breeding season once the eggs are laid. Once those eggs are laid, the chicks spend about a month and a half with the parents, and then they separate to join other groups of American pelicans. After they've done their breeding here in the Tetons, these huge birds leave for their winter range. So we only see them, again, during the summer months, and then they disappear for us in the fall and will come back to us next year. Where do you find them in the winter time? Their winter range is usually around the Gulf of Mexico, California. Some are even in the flyway that'll go down to the coast of Texas. Others still might go all the way down to Panama. So again, only here for the summer months. Because these birds live quite a long time, this 15 to 20 years, it's rather fun for us to think about that some of these birds that we've been seeing consistently every summer, for example, in the Oxbow Bend, we might have been seeing these same birds for a very, very long time, coming back to a similar habitat to eat those fish and to raise those young. They are a very cool bird for our ecosystem and quite beautiful as well. So now you know a little bit more about the American white pelican. Of course, when folks come out here, we love trying to chase around those bears and those moose, those big pieces of wildlife. But waterfowl like this play a critical role in our ecosystem, so we really appreciate them in these summer months. Love, of course, having you out here in the summer months, but if you're joining us in the summer, don't be alarmed about these big white birds. Those are our pelicans, and they belong.
Thanks, Bo. I love to see those pelicans out there in the park in the summertime, and they're always a big crowd favorite. I don't think people think they're going to go on tour and get really excited about really big birds, but they are marvelous, marvelous creatures. Let's get back to the charismatic megafauna, the big fuzzy things, as they say, with perennial Wildlife Wednesday favorite guide Laura, who has some really exciting pronghorn fawns to show us.
Oh, hey guys, this is Laura. I want to tell you about a fun interaction I had on tour the other day with a female pronghorn and her 3 fawns. Pronghorn typically give birth to twins, but I was surprised to see that this individual actually had 3 fawns with her. So how cool. My guests and I were walking up a trail and accidentally spooked this mother pronghorn, but luckily she didn't run away. Pronghorn are extremely fast animals. They can run approximately 55 to 60 miles per hour at a sprint. Also, pronghorn can see really well peripherally. They can see about 320 degrees around their bodies because of eyes set on the sides of their head that bubble out slightly for that good peripheral view to detect predators. So I'm guessing she heard us and saw us. I was really surprised to see 3 fawns jump out with her. She relaxed, as did we, and tended to her fawns as we watched them, which was a super sweet moment. Pronghorn invests a lot of energy into developing their fawns. Twin fawns weigh 1/5 of the mother's body weight. To compare that to a human that's going to give birth to twins, the babies would be around 1/10 or 10% of the mother's body weight. Also, even though these pronghorn fawns are really, really cute, it's so fun to watch them play with each other when they're out there in the sagebrush. Before birth, they've actually outcompeted their siblings. This to me is amazing. When the embryos start to develop, they go through a thread-like stage where each one is kind of like a long, skinny strand. In early development, those strands can actually twist around each other and strangle their opponent to death. Then, as 7 embryos begin to develop, 2 out of those 7 will develop a sharp necrotic tip, which actually pokes or jabs its neighbor in the womb and will kill some of those off. So from 7 original embryos that are trying to implant in the mother's womb, only 2 will survive. So when we see pronghorn out there on the ground, those are the survivors. Those are the fawns that have actually made it to the birth phase. So that's so cool. Mind-blowing to me. But yeah, I hope you enjoy their cuteness this spring, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.
It's so great seeing all the baby pronghorn and all the other baby animals in the springtime. But there's another thing that's out that we don't often talk about, and that's wildflowers and berries. And today we have Sarah Ernst talking about medicinal and edible plants that you can find here in the National Forest and in the national parks.
Hello, this is Guide Sarah Ernst, and I'm out on a hike about half an hour south of Grand Teton National Park in the National Forest. Find myself in an aspen grove right here, and there's also a mix of fir trees and pine trees, some spruce trees, some open meadows, and we're going to take a look and see what kind of medicinal and edible plants we can find in this ecosystem. Couple of notes of caution before I begin. First, of course, whenever you are exploring new edible wild plants, you always want to make sure that you are going with someone who really knows what they're doing. There's lots of toxic and even deadly toxic plants in this region, and you want to make sure that you can identify an edible plant 100% before you put it in your mouth. Second, all of this is for educational and entertainment purposes only, so if you are looking to use wild plants medicinally, you need to be consulting with a medical care provider, not with your ecotours guide. And thirdly, I've stepped off the trail here in the National Forest because it gets very little human visitation, and I don't have to worry too much about causing any damage, and I'm careful not to hit the same places over and over again. But this is not true in a national park, especially one like Yellowstone or Grand Teton that gets millions of visitors per year. So it's important there to stay on the trail so that we don't cause damage to the wildflower habitats you see around you on the trail. And lastly, make sure you know the rules and regulations of the land that you are looking for harvestable plants on. In Grand Teton, for example, you can pick berries to eat as you hike along, but you can't pick gallons and gallons of berries to sell or to store for later. Here in the National Forest, you are allowed to harvest berries to stick in your freezer for later on. I like to add mine to my milkshakes and waffles. This is the thimbleberry, which is a cousin of the wild raspberry, and it kind of looks like it too on a larger scale. The berries are also bright red, although a little bit different texture and shape than a wild raspberry. I really love the flavor of thimbleberries. They're a very delicate berry, and when you gather them, put them in a little bag or jar and bring them home, they're so bruised and beat up that they're really just enjoyed as a trailside snack. Over my shoulder here is a huge patch of another one of my favorite midsummer berries, the wild strawberries, and it grows really well underneath this one pine tree here. We certainly see the most interest in huckleberries when it comes to edible plants around here, and this one was flowering a few weeks ago, so now the berries are developing, and they're still green for the moment, but they're going to be turning a bluish purple color and be ready to harvest. They are pretty small, so it does take a lot of back strain to pick them, or sometimes you can just kind of cling on to the side of the hill because they do like these steep shaded slopes like the one that's behind me. There's a couple of incredibly beautiful wild roses that have just come out along the trail right here. This is one of our few plants that has thorns, although this one doesn't seem to have too much in the way of scary thorns. This will be an edible berry. When it becomes a berry, we call them rose hips. And rose hips can be used in jellies or dried up and used as a tea supplement. You can stick a few dried berries in your tea to give it a nice vitamin C infusion and also a pretty pink color. I also snack on them right off of the shrub, but I do like to wait until we've had a couple of very hard frosts, and what that will do is tenderize the berry and turn some of the starches into sugars and make them a more pleasant experience. You do need to watch out for those seeds though, they're very hard. All right, I know I was going to talk about medicinal and edible plants, and as far as I know, this doesn't have either use, but it's just so darn cool I couldn't resist passing it up. This is a parasitic orchid that is living off of the energy and nutrients of the plants around it through its root system. And it's producing these incredibly delicate, beautiful little orchid flowers. So I just had to point this one out too. All right, so our gardening friends, and maybe our flower arranging friends too, might recognize this flower. This is the wild yarrow, or yarrow, and it is a very useful medicinal plant, and the use is down here in the leaves. I was also looking for yampa today, which isn't in flower yet, but yampa is a similar looking flower with more of a skinny needle-like leaf, and that has an edible root. The leaf of the yarrow is the medicinal part, and you can pick a leaf and kind of squash it up into a poultice. And this poultice will serve as kind of a mild coagulant, helping to stop or slow small bleeds, and then also acts as a protective layer on the wound to help prevent infection. Here's another roadside plant or weed, depending on how you look at it, that I'm being very careful not to touch because this is stinging nettle. Nettle, though, can be steamed or boiled to remove the sting and is one of the most nutritious wild greens one can harvest. Again, here in Jackson Hole, we typically see it near roadsides, so sometimes it's hard to find a stand that you feel is safe enough to harvest, but this one here I do occasionally grab some nettle leaves from. To the left of my EcoTour Adventures logo hat, there is a active beaver pond with a beaver dam along the edge. They typically come out at dusk, so we don't see them too much in the middle of the day when I'm filming this. But the beaver pond beyond it is covered with willow, and we have at least 20 different species of willow that grow in Jackson Hole and Yellowstone. Willow is known for its bark, which contains salicylic acid, a key ingredient in aspirin. Used as a painkiller and anti-inflammatory. I don't know if beavers get the same benefit though.
Thanks, Sarah. Sarah Ernst, who is one of our guides, is one of the newest Wyoming Master Naturalists, part of the class of 2022, just finished up her qualifications. So if there's anybody better to teach you about the edible plants and the flora and fauna of the state of Wyoming, our newly enshrined Master Naturalist here at EcoTour Adventures is definitely the one to pick it. Now, guys, we do want to finish out our wildlife news videos, as we're sort of thinking of them, with an extraordinarily rare sighting. Friend of EcoTour Adventures, Michael Devine, just back on July 3rd, so just a couple days ago, did encounter what has been confirmed by Wyoming Game and Fish to be a wolverine in the Tetons. Let's check it out.
Oh, man.
So kind of hard to see, but look where this blue arrow is going to be. It's a pretty quick video, and you can see this small animal with a very characteristic gait making their way over the top of that snowfield. There's just nothing that quite moves exactly like a wolverine. And so we are really, really confident in this. Now you're going, oh my gosh, so why did you just show me an ant moving across the snow? To understand how rare this is, a wolverine is spotted in the Tetons about every 2 to 3 years on average. The last videotaped sighting of a wolverine was back in 2020. So it's been about 2 years since somebody's seen one. Prior to that, it was back, I think, in 2016. So an incredibly rare event. There's been various studies that have been done recently on wolverines in the Tetons. We're trying to learn a little bit more about their population. Nobody's exactly sure how many of them there are, but it's thought maybe 4 males. Okay. And the entire 100-mile range would be a good estimate to give you an idea. So I don't know if that was a male or female wolverine. Females could be even more uncommon, but that was maybe one of 4 of them in the entire 100 miles. So really pretty cool. Big, big thanks to our good friend Michael Devine, who got that footage and was kind enough to allow us to use it today. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. People always ask me what the rarest animal is on tour. My first answer, of course, is Bigfoot. Yeah. We never see Bigfoot. But after that, it's the wolverine.
Well, don't forget about jackalopes.
And jackalopes. Yeah, jackalopes.
But then when we're going to get real, obviously wolverine. So, guys, we do, of course, have an eco-tour internally at our office, have an internal record board of records that our guides have accomplished. And there are only 2 records that have never been done in one season on the record board. And they have nicknames because we're silly. And one is called the Hugh Jackman. No guide has ever accomplished a Hugh Jackman on tour. And as you probably have guessed, a Hugh Jackman would be to see a wolverine. on tour. The other one that's never been done is a Catter Day. A Catter Day would be
gosh.
seeing a mountain lion, a bobcat, and a Canada lynx on tour, all three in one season. And that's never been done
That's never
either.
been
People
done.
have gotten 2
Like-
out of 3, but that's never been done by anybody.
And I mean, a lot of us guides go an entire season without seeing any cats
Right.
at all.
So to
Yeah.
see all 3 is probably a little optimistic, but it'll sit there enshrined with a blank next to it, waiting for a guide's name until one day that
Exactly.
can happen. Now, the one that, so far we've had a couple record breakers.
This season already.
Yeah, we earliest moose calf observed. Verlin got the new record for that this year. Most geysers seen in a single day. And they have to be over 3 feet in height, I think is the way we described that rule. Definitely that one's just recently
And do
been
you
broken.
do you eternal geysers, geysers that never stop going off? Do
Yeah.
those count?
Those count.
Those count. Okay.
But that they have to be over 3 feet, and it's
Yeah.
the number you saw in one day. So you have to catch a lot of the predictable ones in order to pull that off. So lucky guests on that particular tour. If you guys are curious, we can always talk more about the Eco Tour record board. If you really want to know more about it in our Ask a Naturalist segment, feel free to ask us about that. But in the meantime, it's time for my second favorite part of the program. My favorite part is Ask a Naturalist segment, which is
Exactly.
coming up next. So if you have a question for us about the natural world, the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, you plan to travel here, natural world in general, you want to talk about clouds, we'll do our best, see if you can stump us. Kelsey is with us in the comment section, and she'll help highlight some of your questions as well. But yeah, we'll be doing that in about 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So feel free to ask those questions. In the meantime, we've got our trivia question.
Trivia,
of the
yeah.
month. Now, Tyler, our trivia master, has definitely asked some stumpers of questions lately. So the way this is going to work is if you answer correctly in the comment section of the original video, so if this has been shared somewhere else on the internet, you have to go back to the Eco Tour Adventure video so we can see your comments. If you answer correctly anytime in the next month before the next content goes out, the question, you'll get a chance to win a gift card to the Eco Tour Adventures store. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about last month's question first. So feel free to tell us what you think in the comment section, but we've already awarded that gift card, so no more chances to win
Exactly.
on that one. And then we'll talk about this month's question, and then you do want to comment for sure in the comment section for your chance to win. Make sense, everybody? Okay, this month's question is sponsored by, of course, our web store item of the month. This is our Eco Tour Adventures Bear Sunset hats. Hopefully Kelsey, our guide in the comment section, will put up a link to that in our web store. If you'd like to own one of these or the cool Bison Teton hat, definitely check out that link. We've got lots of really fun things in the web store for you to see. All sorts of goodies, great books on natural history, photography by the guides, local crafts by local artists, or if you just enjoyed the videos that you saw this month and you want to give a tip to the Eco Tour guides who made them, feel free to do that through the web store as well. We offer this free of charge, and we're always happy to do that. But 100% of the proceeds of our web store go back to the guides who make these videos. So if you'd like to support us, people have asked over the years how they can do that because they enjoy this program.
Yeah.
This is a good way to do it. All right. Enough of that. Let's get to the fun part, which is the trivia question, right?
Awesome. Yeah. So last month we asked you a question about beavers, and so here's the question. And the question is, how long can a beaver hold their breath? And we had a bunch of different answers, and I think this definitely stumped some people for sure. And so I'll give you guys a moment to think about how long a beaver can hold their breath. And remember, they do have to dive under oftentimes riverbanks or lake banks to enter their riverside burrows or to enter their lodge. And of course, they feed a lot on aquatic vegetation under the water. All right, guys, give your best guess. The answer to last month's trivia was D, 15 minutes, which was a lot longer than I expected. I thought for sure it was 5 minutes, but it's actually 15 minutes,
Yeah.
which is longer than
I
a
had no
hippo.
idea. I had no idea.
Yeah, I honestly didn't have any idea
Yeah.
either.
I talk about beavers for a living, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some locations when we're on tour, you'll see a beaver surface and they're like chewing on some water vegetation, making funny noises as they always do. And then they'll dive underwater and they will literally swim across the entire lake completely underwater.
Yeah.
And I mean, 15 minutes, it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, I get
Yeah.
how they're doing it now. But yeah, I had no idea it was that long. I figured it was right around the 5 minute
crazy.
range.
Yeah.
Normally, to be fair, when you're looking at beavers, they go under for 30 seconds or less and come
It's
back
very
up.
quick.
But that's because they're foraging, right? They're active at dawn and dusk and they have things to do rather than just sit under the water. But gosh, if there was a predator around.
If there was a bear or a cougar
Yeah.
and those beavers had to escape, I mean, they could porpoise away underwater.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
I mean, yeah.
And on land, beavers are incredibly vulnerable to bears and wolves and cougars. A couple of people up on the northern range of Yellowstone told me that the Cougar Creek pack of wolves this spring killed a beaver, which is super uncommon in Yellowstone. It's something we see more in like Voyageurs National Park, back east, where there are a lot more beavers. And so these beavers do need to rely on their aquatic abilities to escape those predators. Thank you so much for everyone who asked or answered that question. I hope a lot of you got it right.
Yeah.
And I think we'll move on to this month's trivia question. And this month's is about one of the beaver's main predators, the grizzly bear. And so here's this month's question. What is the most common food grizzlies eat? A pretty simple question, but don't let it stump you. And grizzlies are omnivores. And without giving the question away, I will say that they are omnivores, but they are specialized in seasonal bouts of food.
Yeah.
Meaning that they move across the landscape between different locations, getting seasonal abundances of food. Now, those seasonal abundances don't always make up the majority of their diet. They have to feed in between those abundances. And so everyone give your best answer, and hopefully you get a shot. Ooh, I see a lot of great answers coming in.
Yeah.
Sweet.
All right, I
Awesome.
see tons of good answers
Yeah.
coming
Oh,
in.
they're piling in already.
Yeah, very cool. Great to see so many folks tuning in and joining us. I've been having such fun seeing where everybody's joining us from. So if you haven't commented yet and let us know, I'd love to see. Kelsey, will you post who's furthest away
Yeah.
in the comment section and sort of scroll through that? Okay, while you guys mull over the question to the trivia, let's go ahead and do our favorite part of this.
Yeah.
At least my favorite part. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your
This
mouth.
is definitely my favorite part.
Okay, fair enough.
The question and answer.
Yeah, which is Ask a Naturalist segment, right? We are live, so unless Chris, you're watching this later, and then we're not live. But if you've got anybody in the household, we answer questions from folks that are 2 years old, 20 years old, and if they could live that long, 200 years old. So any and all questions are welcome. Try and stump us. We're always happy to say we don't know if we don't know. But yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll start from the questions people have already asked, and then feel free, and we'll kind of get to as many of them as we can here. There's a lot of questions, of course, about the flooding in Yellowstone and Grand Teton. So real quick background on this for those of you who are familiar, and then Tyler is actually a little bit more familiar with the northern stuff, so we'll let him talk a little bit more about that. But we had just a sort of bizarre winter where it didn't snow very much in Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park until late spring, and then snowed a whole lot, and then stayed very, very cold very late. So that when things finally did warm up, they warmed up with a vengeance, and a tremendous amount of snowmelt went into our river systems and created once in 100-year floods. Most of the damage that you've heard about on the national news occurred in the northern half of Yellowstone National Park. And there's been a rather large misconception. We here down in Jackson, Wyoming, and down closer to Grand Teton National Park, sustained incredibly minimal damage. When I say minimal damage, a few trees down, some high water marks that weren't flooding anything, but certainly was a lot of water. We are just fine down here in Grand Teton, but our good friends up in Cook City and Silvergate and Red Lodge and Gardner, not so much. Definitely struggling. So we'll get back to that in a minute. Let's go into the current status of things. So on June 22nd, the Park Service shut down the entirety, a couple days before June 22nd, I want to say 4 days before that, the Park Service shut down the entirety of Yellowstone National Park just to assess the damage. Were all the bridges intact? How was wastewater? How did things look? So we were kept out of the park for about a week. The park reopened the southern loop of Yellowstone National Park, which is mostly where our day tours travel to. I'd say about 80% of what we do at Jackson Hole Eco Tour Adventures is in that southern loop on June 22nd. And then they opened up the northern loop, which is the vast majority of the rest of what we do, just a couple days ago. I want to say July 1st?
It was I think it was July 2nd or
July
1st.
1st, something along those lines. So 93% of Yellowstone National Park is now open to public entry. The two areas that are not open and will not be open for some time include the road from Mammoth Hot Springs at the very, very northern part of the park to Gardner, Montana, which is the first community outside of Yellowstone National Park if you're exiting out the north entrance. The way the park talks about this, so terminology-wise, so we're all going to make sense, is that there are two loops in the park. There's, Yellowstone's a big square. There's a lower loop, there's an upper loop, and then there are entrance roads that move out and radiate out from those loops to communities. So the north entrance road that runs from Mammoth to Gardner was extensively damaged. And when I say extensively damaged, more than a dozen bridges and structures fell in. Basically, the road, they don't think it's repairable. They don't think they'll be able to put a road back in where it was. It is gone.
The river actually rerouted itself.
Yeah.
And so it has washed away like hundreds of yards of roadway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you were to rebuild in the canyon, which they don't think they will, it would take many years. There is, however, an old stagecoach road. Back in the old days, 1872 on, they actually used a different route to get through there. They didn't go through the canyon. And that old stagecoach road has reopened to local traffic, people who live in Gardner, so that community is not cut off. Park Service employees are able to use that road right now. They are planning to pave it, and hopefully by next summer there will be access from the northern side of Yellowstone. In the meantime, you can always come in from the south, which is the side we're on, from the west, which is West Yellowstone, Montana, from the east, which is of course Cody, Wyoming. The other entry, so there's 5 ways to get into the park, right? So like we just said, west, south, east, north, which will remain closed for some time, and then the northeast entrance road, which goes to Cook City and Silvergate, Montana, and then from there on the Beartooth Pass to Red Lodge, Montana. There are sort of 3 spots where the road washed away, 2 more serious spots where the road washed away in the Lamar Valley, which is where we have some of the greatest densities of wolves and grizzlies in the world. So we do spend a lot of time there. They are going to use military bridge vehicles. And if you know more about this, feel free to tell us in the comment section. But I guess if you're going to like invade a country or something, or rescue a country, you can create a bridge off like a semi-truck, is the way it's been described to me, and build a new bridge when a bridge is missing. They're going to use some of those military vehicles to restore access to those communities, which of course are, blocked off from that side. To get out of Cook City, Montana right now is a, 3-hour drive, basically, because they're blocked off. So those kids have to go to school, people need groceries. They are going to find a way to have access. How soon that access is going to be open to the general public, we don't know, maybe late summer, but it will likely be open to guiding services like us a little sooner than that. I'm assuming it's one-way traffic.
And so I believe you can actually get to Silvergate into Cook City, but over the Beartooth Pass from Red Lodge and from Cody, but you can't get to them through Yellowstone. The big issue for these communities is that a lot of their livelihood and a lot of their business depends on the national park. And so there's a lot of fear right now about the small businesses in these communities. I know there's a lot of funds currently to help support these local businesses. And if you guys are in the area, I would definitely encourage, going and spending maybe a day in one of these communities just to help the little local economies there, because they're going to really struggle in the next year or so because of this flood. Essentially, their main source of income is completely cut off, and it's pretty devastating to these communities.
Yeah, so to be clear, 93% of Yellowstone National Park is open. We're working really hard to fight the rumors that don't come to Yellowstone this year. No, Yellowstone's open. Come to Yellowstone, come out with us. The best thing you can do right now is support these communities that have been devastated. Don't stay away. That's just going to doom them. Come to Yellowstone. Yellowstone's open. You can have the same experience you would have had last year. That said, it's been really, really hard on our good friends. I've spent my entire career working out of Cook City and Silvergate and somewhat Gardner. We've got a lot of friends and family and businesses we've worked with for, almost a generation at this point in those communities that are just absolutely devastated. And so if you want to know more about this, Kelsey can comment in the comment section. We wrote a nice blog post about ways you can support these communities with your help. There's some relief disaster funds that have been set up. And Kelsey can put that up in the comment section. Thank you, Kelsey, for writing that article about how to best help folks. Definitely check that out. Have you been to Gardner?
I have. I went all the way around through Bozeman, and it's dead quiet. Yeah. I mean, I've been there. I go there periodically throughout the year. In the winter, it's usually pretty quiet. It is more quiet than I've ever seen it in the dead of winter, even compared to January. And this is the time of year where people are depending on tourists, coming during the summer and spending money and supporting those businesses. And they just came out of winter. These businesses usually don't make a lot of money during the winter. They make it during the summer when most of the tourists are here. And now the summer is essentially gone for them. As far as the road from Livingston to Gardner, it's fine. I think they had one issue with a bridge, and that bridge has now been restored, and you can drive over it safely, just slowly. And so the road between Livingston and Gardner is perfectly safe to drive, and you can see wildlife all along that road. Just outside of Gardner. I mean, I was there about a week ago. We saw bison and elk and pronghorn, lots of animals. And so there are still things to see in Gardner, still things to do. You can go whitewater rafting, lots of great hikes out there. There's definitely things to do out in Livingston and Gardner if you guys head out that way.
Now, remarkably, not a single person lost their lives as a result of this disaster. Lots of people lost their homes and their possessions, but really, really impressive. I just saw in the Libby made a really good point here. Park Service really did do an incredible job getting Yellowstone National Park open. So if you can help spread the word, help us out. The alternating license plate system that was in place for a couple of weeks there, it's gone. You can just go in any day you want. Yellowstone's open. Don't be scared. Come see us. 93% of the park is open. Of course, all of Grand Teton is completely fine. So great question. Tracy, you just pointed out they closed the park on June 13th. Thank you for the date. You were at Gardner. Oh my gosh. I'm glad you got out safely. That must have been a little scary for sure. So thanks so much for letting us know on that. So Dawn asked, I saw that some backcountry patrol cabins were destroyed in Yellowstone. Will they be rebuilt? They are nowhere near making those decisions. So to clarify, basically every week or so, Yellowstone has a meeting with all of its permit holders, and I attend that meeting. And they are trying to tell us as much as they can, as quickly as they can. And there's so much left for them to assess. Their first thing is to look at trails and bridges in the backcountry. First and foremost, to make sure people can travel the backcountry safely, to make sure that horses can travel the backcountry safely, and outfitters can do that. And then they're kind of starting to look at some of these cabins. Some of these patrol cabins were not only National Historic Landmarks, but are some of the oldest structures in the state of Wyoming. And so to lose them is really, really devastating. So regardless of whether they choose to rebuild them or not, the historic element of some of these structures is gone.
It's really sad. I believe one of the cabins that I stayed at in the Black Canyon of the Yellowstone is gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, lots of historical items in that cabin were lost. There's a lot of journal entries from people that go back decades. I wrote a journal entry. All of those things are gone, and so it's pretty devastating for sure.
Yeah. Libby, she's got a great idea. She says you could book a room and tell them you're not going to use it, or buy a meal for a local person or a local restaurant in those towns. I love that idea.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, just because I think it's a beautiful story. We had an entire summer of hotel rooms because we're in Cook City just about every night of the week in the summertime on our multi-day programs with guests up there on private programs. And we had lodging in Cook City and Silvergate and Gardner for the whole summer, obviously. And we contacted all of our partners who we've been working with their lodging for a long, long time and said, obviously, we're not going to be able to use your lodging. And they said, we're not going to charge you a cancellation fee And we kind of looked at them like, don't you need the money?
Yeah.
Like, we were expecting, obviously, to have to do that. And they said, no, we've got to take care of you guys. And we said, no, we've got to take care of you guys. We're going to be okay. So the character of these folks, the old Western handshake is my bond, relationships of these folks who have worked so hard is just, it's, we don't need to be a Debbie Downer here, but is really commendable. I worry about some of these little restaurants. There's a little bistro restaurant up in Cook City that has the best escargot in the whole wide world, including Paris. And I challenge you to, when they've got everything back open, to go try the escargot at the bistro. And you tell me if it's better than anything else you've had. It's a French provincial chef who cooks for a room of about 8 tables or something in Cook City. Best French cooking I've ever had in my life. So if you get a chance to get up there and check out some of these places, hopefully they will survive and be stronger for it. All right, enough on that, because I know we've got a lot to talk about. I don't want to go on and on about the flooding forever here. One last question. How did the Roosevelt cabins make out? They are okay. Xanterra is not sure if they're going to open them for the season yet. That has more to do with staffing than any kind of damage, right? Because they can't just have everybody hold tight and not make any money for a month while they're closed and then somehow magically staff them to open them for the rest of the season. So Canyon and Roosevelt cabins in terms of lodging, still some questions on whether those are going to open back up or not. So great question there.
And I think they've closed quite a few of the campgrounds in Yellowstone for the entire season.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know.
Yep. Okay. Let's see here. What else we've got? Oh, this is fun. Y'all do an amazing job. Loved my tour with Bo and Sarah. And a few stops along our tour was so kind and knowledgeable. That's so fun. I love that.
That's awesome.
Here we go. What does a wolverine eat?
Oh, this is a great question.
I love this.
Yeah, so wolverines are carnivores. They are members of the mustelid family. And so if you don't know what the mustelid family is, that is the weasel family. It includes otters, weasels, badgers, and most of those animals are carnivores. They're obligate carnivores, which means they have to eat meat. And the wolverine is no exception. They are complete carnivores. Besides the occasional berry, they're mainly hunting down mammals and occasionally grouse and other birds. Wolverines are incredible because they survive at these super high elevation areas throughout the winter, where most animals like elk and moose and deer migrate to lower elevations for the winter. Wolverines actually stay. Even animals like mountain lions will follow the herds of prey out of the mountains to the lower elevations.
It's because they're badass.
Yeah, they're incredible.
I want to be reincarnated as a
Wolverine.
I know.
It might be
I
a
really
hard
do.
life, though.
I don't care.
You don't
I wanna
care.
do
It's too.
I want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I'm interrupting. You were saying.
Oh no, you're good. I watched this documentary about what wolverines eat in the winter, and honestly, a lot of their diet in the winter is scavenging. A lot of times from animals that die in avalanches, and of course, that would be bighorn sheep and mountain goats primarily that are living high up in these mountainous elevations and get caught in those snowfields and in those avalanches when they're trying to cross to new areas to feed. And so the wolverines, they can actually locate food like 10 feet under the snow and dig out those animals that have died in the avalanches and carry them out. They'll actually, a nickname for the wolverine is the glutton, and they will eat a huge amount of food and then take a lot of their extra food and store it in other places. A couple of years ago, I think maybe it was a decade, we actually lost our last caribou herd in the lower 48s. And those caribou were actually died in an avalanche, and they were eaten by wolverines. Actually.
Yep.
Yeah, and so these wolverines, at least in these mountainous areas, do depend on winter kill. In the summer, their diet varies quite a bit more. They include a lot more rodents and a lot more lagomorphs. A lagomorph is like a hare or a rabbit. Down here in the Tetons, they'd be feeding a lot on like yellow-bellied marmots and American red squirrels. But wolverines don't just live in the mountains. They live up into the Canadian Arctic and in the boreal zone, all the way, north of the Brooks Range in Alaska. And in those areas, they will eat any sort of animal protein they can find, whether that's salmon, whether that's, even a bear that may be died during hibernation, or obviously caribou. Basically, any source of animal protein they will eat and take advantage of to survive.
People
Pretty
sometimes
incredible.
ask me, what happens to bighorn sheep when they mess up on a cliff?
Yes.
They become wolverine food.
Exactly.
And I don't say that lightly because sometimes it's very sad to see that happen. But it's very rare, and of course the wolverines have to eat too.
Yeah.
So
they eat lamb chops all
lamb
winter.
chops all winter. Yeah, because it is the young sheep who tend to make mistakes. If we're going to
Yeah.
be honest about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, fun fact: we have more types of weasel here than anywhere else in the world. Here in the Tetons, and of course, when I ask my guests to name me different kinds of weasels, the one that they struggle the most with is usually they can't think of a wolverine as a type of weasel. So, I don't know, you want to win a bet in a bar or something, feel free to ask people to name all of the wolverines, all the weasel types.
Yeah. I think for a long time, people didn't even know what a wolverine was.
Yeah.
They were like, is it a bear? Is it a dog?
Yeah,
It
is it a
doesn't really
badger?
look like a weasel.
Yeah.
And so I get that. I
Yeah.
get that.
For sure. So great question. Thanks for that. Another flooding question. How was the wildlife affected by all the flooding? So great question. It depends on the wildlife. So if you are nesting waterfowl, for instance, most of those nests have hatched at this point. So if you're a trumpeter swan or a sandhill crane or a mallard, and you lay your eggs nearby riverbanks which have flooded, the good news is your babies were probably hatched by the time this flood occurred. The bad news is those babies certainly would have been vulnerable to the tempest of water that came through. So we'll see, but my expectation is that most of our waterfowl offspring in the areas that flooded didn't survive this. But, for instance, if you're a bird of prey that relies on riparian habitat, bald eagles, ospreys, and the like, well, that's why they nest so high up in those trees, both for protection from predation, but also protection from things like flooding. So they should be quite fine. As for big fuzzy kind of things, they know how to get out of the way of water. They are much, much better adapted to flooding than people are. So if you're a moose or an elk or anything along those lines, I'm not saying that we didn't lose some here or there, but for the most part, they probably came through this relatively unscathed. Their mothers know to go to high ground. As for the areas that are cut off from visitation, gosh, they're going to get a couple of years off from people visiting them in Yellowstone National Park. So
Benefited in that way.
yeah, some of our wildlife populations will probably benefit greatly from the fact that this thing has happened that has been so hard on people, but probably not terribly hard for the most part on wildlife. So great question, for sure.
Most animals don't drown.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's only 3 or 4 records of wolves drowning in Yellowstone in the entire time since they've been reintroduced. And so it is a pretty rare phenomena. You know, most animals will look at a raging river and know not to cross it. Occasionally animals make mistakes, but that is pretty rare. Occasionally elk and bison do drown, especially the younger ones. But I mean, no adult female bison is going to try and cross the Yellowstone when it's flooding with her baby.
Yeah.
And so these animals do know when the situations are dangerous for the most part.
Yeah, great question. Here we go. Don asks, what bird or predator preys on pelicans?
Ooh, this is a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so probably carnivores, primarily in the order or the family Canidae, so wolves, coyotes, dog species. You know, I haven't read of any predation occurring in Yellowstone, and that's because these pelicans are largely inaccessible even when they're nesting, and that's because pelicans like to nest on islands. Now, in other places of the world, pelicans will nest on these lakes that evaporate throughout the dry season. And so this would happen in like Utah or Nevada in the Great Basin, or in places like Africa, south of the Sahara, so sub-Sahara Africa. I believe Etosha National Park, the Etosha Pan, pelicans nest out there. And jackals, which are a close relative of coyotes and wolves, are their primary predator in those areas. And so it would primarily be large dogs. Now, birds of prey, at least in North America, don't really prey on pelicans because of how large they are. I don't know if you heard Bo talking about pelicans and how large they are. They are a contender for North America's largest bird, along with the California condor and the trumpeter swan. And so they're pretty invulnerable to predators. And Bo also stated that they live a long time, like 50 years. And so there's no predator that regularly preys on pelicans. It would be more of an opportunistic situation. Maybe a mountain lion is cruising along a riverbank, happens across a sick pelican, and takes it out. It would clearly just be an opportunity.
For sure.
Yeah.
Great question there. Laura, our intrepid guide Laura, who you saw earlier talking about the pronghorn fawns, she says, was it Sean or Verlin with the first moose calf record?
Oh.
I'd like to say it was absolutely Sean who had the current record.
Okay.
And then I think Verlin just beat it. But I'm not sure we've updated the board yet. So
Okay.
I don't want to, kudos to Sean. I don't want to make it sound like, we don't want to neglect Sean's good record there. So great one. Okay, we got time for just a couple extra questions. Mark, you've got a good one. Are any extra actions being taken with the repeated stories of bison conflicts with tourists? So for those of you guys who are not up to date on random wildlife news from Yellowstone, we've had 4 people attacked by bison in Yellowstone National Park this year. While that is not necessarily atypical, it's always unfortunate. 2 in the last week, or 3 in the last week.
I know of at least 2.
I think it's 2 in the last week. I
It
can't.
might be 3.
I might be 3.
There's so many we can't keep track.
Okay. So here's our problem. Years ago, the Park Service, Yellowstone, had a lawsuit, and basically somebody sued, saying that natural acts, the park should do a better job keeping track of wildlife and things like trees following or hot springs, and protect the public. And Yellowstone responded to this by saying we'd have to just put 8-foot chain link fences around the whole park. We can't keep people out of wilderness. That's kind of the whole point. And so at that point, they came up with a plan of basically, it's called the gross negligence plan. Unless Yellowstone National Park is showing gross negligence in its management, it is the fault of somebody who decides to go into wilderness and approach a bison. And you can't sue and get a reward from the federal government for something like this happening. That said, as part of gross negligence, it is the job of Yellowstone National Park to educate the public that they need to be careful around bison. So when you walk into the park, you get a flyer warning you that wildlife, particularly bison, are dangerous and you shouldn't approach them. When you go into the area where the bison herds are, there are giant signs on the side of the road saying wildlife are dangerous and you shouldn't approach them. When you go through the entrance stations, there are giant signs that say wildlife are dangerous and you shouldn't approach them. When you go to the visitor centers, there's videos showing some of the carnage of people who've been attacked. Everyone survives in these videos, saying bison are dangerous and you shouldn't approach them. These signs, these flyers, they're in multiple languages. There's no way that you could move through Yellowstone National Park. The park newspaper, the park map, they all talk about how you need to be careful around bison. There's no way you can pretend that you somehow didn't know that this was going to be a concern. What happens is one person is kind of close, getting a picture with a cell phone. Nothing happens to that person. Somebody goes, oh, this is fine. So they all get as close as that person is. And then somebody gets a little closer and closer and closer until one of 2 things happens. Either a mother bison with young goes, okay, too close, guys. And the way bison work is, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine.
I'm not fine.
I'm not fine. So they just are grazing and they seem like they don't care. And then in a split second later, they decide that they do. A car door slams, something spooks them. They are herbivores, think like a horse. And they whip their head up and now they've got to take action. In August, as we get into our bison rut, sometimes bull bison will take offense when they think somebody is stealing their cows, their harem. So it could be as simple as you drive your car between a bull and the cows. It's really, really unfortunate. And it's incredibly frustrating for those of us who are in the park every day because everybody's doing everything they can to try to keep people safe. But we can't just put 8-foot chain link fences around the park either. So I think the park's doing everything they can do, really, without removing the element of you being able to have a wild experience. So no, there probably isn't any plan in that regard.
And there's millions of people coming to Yellowstone. The vast majority of people come to Yellowstone and don't have any dangerous encounter, no incident at all. This is a very, very small percentage of people who actually come to Yellowstone,
let me
find
be
themselves
clear.
in trouble.
You're not going to die if you go to Yellowstone.
Yeah.
We have 1 million visitors a month to Yellowstone, to give you an idea. And in the 2 months of the season, we've had 4 people attacked.
And that seems like a lot. For a normal year, but that's still such a tiny, small percentage of the visitors who come.
All 4 of those people were within 25 yards of that animal when it chose to attack. Any wild animal is not going to think that's great. Okay, so on that note, because we're talking about animal attacks now, right? Has a human ever been attacked by a wolverine? In North America, no. There's some stories going back to the Middle Ages about rabid wolverines,
Oh,
like a wolverine who gets rabies.
sounds terrifying.
But there's some debate on the weasel family and rabies because their body temperature is pretty high. And so just like rodents, there's a question of how much rabies is transmittable to the rodent family.
Could wolverines get it just because they are larger than most mustelids, and so their body temperature
It might be lower. And
might be
I
lower.
don't know what the internal body temperature of a wolverine is, to be
Yeah,
honest
I
with
don't-
you. But for a perfect, like an example of this, squirrels usually don't carry rabies because they don't have the right body temperature. The virus just can't survive in their bodies. Really fun fact, marsupials just can't carry rabies because their body temperature is wrong.
They're too
So like
cold.
possums,
Yeah,
are too cold to carry rabies.
the opposite.
Rabies, of course, one of the most ancient diseases that human beings have ever come in contact with. So escaping animals out of their mind with things like distemper or rabies, which, those aren't normal wild animals. No, wolverines don't attack people. They can be exceptionally aggressive towards their carcasses that they're guarding because that's how they're going to eat. Carcasses are few and far between. So they have this reputation of being these fierce, mean animals. And it's because the only time anybody gets them on camera is either because they've baited an area with meat, and then the wolverine shows up, and then they show up to shoot it, and the wolverine's going, "This is my meat, get away," or because they find a carcass and they camera trap it or something else, and then we have video of a wolverine guarding it against other animals. And so the only time we have an opportunity to film wolverines is when they have to be defensive over their food, and so the only time we see any footage of them is when they're being kind of snarly.
Yeah.
But the 99% of the time when they're not guarding their resources, they're not snarly. So it's a bit of an undeserved reputation. People think, oh, they're mean and they attack. Well, yeah, maybe if you walked up on a carcass and put your hand in their face, I think any predator would probably have a problem
And
with
they
that.
have to have some grit to survive out here. Not only are they in that harsh environment, but they have to deal with bears and cougars who want their kills. And
Right.
so they do have to have some grit. Biggest cause of death for wolverines in Canada are actually wolves.
Yeah.
Wolves hunt down and kill wolverines. And so a wolf is faster and larger than a wolverine. So they have to be tough. They have to have some grit to survive out here.
Yeah. So I think wolverines, as these mean, snarly animals, have a bit of an undeserved reputation. That said, they don't back down as easily as other predators, in much the same way as you might hear about honey badgers or things like
Yeah.
that, because they've got to stand up for themselves. And there are wolverines who, absolutely fight off some of these really big things like bears and mountain lions who just don't want to mess with it. So really an admirable animal. By the way, one of my favorite scientific names out there.
Yes.
I'm kind of a scientific animal nerd. Gulo. It's just fun to say. Gulo. Roars off the tongue, right? Great question there. Gosh, you guys, I think we've run out of time. There's a couple more questions that I see people have asked, including a really exciting one on delayed implantation that I wish we had time to talk about.
Oh, man.
But we'll go ahead and we'll answer in the comments section for you. If you have any other questions after this live is finished, just ask us in the comments. We'll be taking a look and answering them throughout the month. But I really want to thank everybody for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to spend the first Wednesday at 5:30 on Facebook Live with all of you each month. We're so grateful. We have gotten more emails and phone calls and messages of support on Facebook and social media over the last month. It has been an incredibly tough month for everybody in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We've come out of this in relatively great shape comparatively to other people.
Yeah.
And so while this has been tough for our guides and our staff and our people, boy, it's been nothing compared to what some other folks have gone through. So I do want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you guys who've been wonderful supporters of us and have said, what can we do? What's going to happen? Are you guys okay? How can I help the guides? The number of messages I've gotten of, I went out with so-and-so last year or 5 years or 6 years ago. Are they okay? Do they have enough work? How can I help them? It's just really touching. It means that they're having these just really wonderful life experiences with people, that they're remembering them years later and wanting to make sure they're okay. So we are all just fine. And we're so thankful. So our best wishes to all of you. We'll see you next month. We'll have more videos.
Yeah.
Big thanks to Tyler for editing them all this month.
No problem.
Yeah. And I hope you all have a wild month, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.